I thought that if we poured molten aluminium at 750 degrees C onto wood, you would just end up with a slushy mess of molten aluminium and ash. Turns out this is not the case. To understand exactly how we got here, we need to rewind a little bit. So, epoxy river tables are all over YouTube at the minute, and I love them, but I've had a big idea. What happens if we were to replace the epoxy with molten aluminium to make them even more beautiful? And let's face it, it'd be pretty exciting pouring molten aluminium onto wood. I want to build a side table stroke coffee table for next to my sofa, but first there are 3 things we need to work out before we can even think about success. The first thing we need to trial is exactly how the wood and aluminium are going to react. I'm going to trial this by pouring 3 different depths of aluminium onto 2 types of wood. This is just some plain softwood, and this is some cut and glued plywood that gives a striped effect that I really like the look of, and I want to see if it looks even better charred. That was fun. Not overly successful, but fun. Let's have a closer look at the issues. It was so big, it didn't pour very well onto the wood. Difficult to spread the aluminium out, so the aluminium is proud of the surface. Due to the contraction, the aluminium has not bonded to the wood. And not steam. And due to this, air pockets have been created under the aluminium. Aluminium has caused the wood to bend. But I guess at least the heat better than the others, and it looks like the cut and glued plywood fared the best. Obviously, disappointed that we didn't succeed on the first go, but that's why we do trials. And I think most of these problems can be solved by how we design and cut the channels for the aluminium, and we can trial this prior to the final pour. But in the meantime, on to flame charring the wood. This should be interesting. There's not much difference between these, only the surface has been charred and the structure of all of them is absolutely fine. This area that has not been sanded has got a lovely texture to it, and the more it's been charred, the greater that texture. This is definitely the finish I want in the final piece. In this final trial, I want to see the best way of casting 2 sections of aluminium at 90 degrees to each other as seamlessly as possible. And while we're doing that, we can try to iron out some of these other issues. So I'm going to make the wood thicker to combat the bending. I'm going to make the channels for the aluminium thinner and deeper. I'm going to try a pattern with the aluminium that's similar to a braided river. Let's hope for a bit more success before we tackle the final build. let's just say learnt a lot from that trial. What a schoolboy error not levelling it before I poured the aluminium. So there's a whole host of lessons to be taken into the final build, mainly around the molten aluminium. And my biggest concern is that there is a lot of work in cutting and gluing the plywood and building the structure before we even get on to the riskiest part, pouring the aluminium. So at that stage, or even before, there's a lot of things to consider, like the channels not being too complex, having the islands of wood large enough so they don't just burn, not going too close to the edge, how we key the aluminium to the wood, possibly by drilling holes in the bottom of the channels, and what volume of aluminium to have in what size crucible. And while neither of the trials have gone well pouring the molten aluminium, I think we've learnt enough to give the final build a go. Right, the pouring of the aluminium went reasonably well, but it's still not bonded to the wood. So before we plough on, what I want to do is glue these in and sand it all back. Great, it's all done and dusted. I've finished off the flame charring, I've cleaned up the aluminium with some sandpaper and I've given it all a coat of varnish. So let's put it in its final resting place, look at it finished, and I'll meet you on the other side to share my final thoughts on the project. All in all, I'm really pleased with how the project went and how it looks. It did take a lot longer to trial and build than I thought it would. Also, pouring the aluminium was much tougher than I expected, and it's not quite as neat as I would have liked. I've tried filling in some of the gaps, but it just wasn't having it. The aluminium would just solidify on the surface and not fill from the base. Overall, I've really enjoyed the project and I hope you have too. If you did, hit that like button, and if you're not yet subscribed, please do, and I'll see you in the next one.